Shut up, compressor.
Northwest 4 at 18, over. Roger, take care.
Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to episode 8 of the Tamiya F-4B Phantom build. Now that everything is ready for paint, it's time to, well, paint. And as you can see, I've already done some white on here kind of throughout the course of the build. But now it's time to get serious about it. And I know in part 7 I talked about starting by masking off the core guard on the leading edges. I started doing that and realized, you know what, that shit is really, really small and a pain in the ass to mask first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint everything, then mask from the inside of the wing out to the leading edge, and then paint the silver last. So that'll be happening at the same time that all the heat shield shit goes on back here, etc. With basically the entire Phantom covered in masking tape, because, oh my god, do metallics love their overspray. But first, we're going to start essentially roughing in the white pattern here with MRP US Navy White. I don't know if this will be what I use for the final white, or if I'm going to use the somewhat dingier Insignia White, but, you know, we'll see how it goes. Focus on that first. And this will literally take hours, probably. Okay, so as I'm painting this, it's becoming increasingly clear to me I'm going to need to basically rough things in and then go back and refine, just because this is a messy bitch. So on the underside, I've got the US Navy White all laid down. It's looking okay. Again, it's going to need some refining. Trick is I need to get it closer and then kind of dial it in. And so we're going to start with the upper light gold gray. And as we've been doing with things like the intakes and stuff, we're going to start into this with some dark Gunship Gray to kind of base it and break up the black primer. Now, I'm not really aiming for anything super fancy with this. Just putting something down, again, to break up the black primer. That's also why I'm using the 267 as opposed to the 771. It's because at this stage, I don't need that level of finesse. This is just kind of a rough deal with shit for the moment kind of thing. Okay, so now that I've got the dark Gunship Gray placed on here, I've decided it's time to move into the light gold gray. Now, this will not be the final coat by any means, but kind of like I did with the P38 and the P40, I want to do some sandwich shading, and a big part of that is establishing the top coat early and then putting stuff on top of it and then putting more top coat on top of that to kind of blend it all together. And yeah, so here we go. This is MRP 98 light gold gray, loaded up in my trusty Guns Pro Convoy PS 267. Make sure we're in a happy spraying zone. And then we're just going to get after it. And one thing I'm realizing with this thing that I didn't pick up on back when I was putting it together is these folded wingtips. I should have waited. I should have gotten them nicely glued in on the folding side, but then under here, goodbye tail, where they line up with the pylons completely hide that entire joint, so there's really like no point in stressing about it. It's taken care of. So yeah, next time I build one of these, when they come out with a J, or God forbid, something even cooler like an E or a G. Oh, they didn't really fold the wings on those, but okay, a J or an S or something, I'll have a different plan of attack. Part of the other thing here is I want to get this down early because with the folded wings, there's a lot of trapped air in here, and so I'm expecting some dusting to pop up. Spraying at a nice low pressure and getting really close, so hopefully it won't be that big of a deal, but it's really hard to avoid when there's limited working room. Okay, so here we have the initial light gold gray coat down on the Phantom. Next up, it's going to be coming in and actually providing some interesting differences between the panels, doing some white in some of the panel lines, maybe even some pink, and basically just taking this and giving it a lot more character. I also need to deal with the white of the flaperons and all that kind of shit at some point in time, but not quite yet. I want to go ahead and again build up the light gold gray so that it's got a whole bunch of interesting character going on in it, as opposed to sort of the overall gray blandness that we've got right now. Okay, so when I came back and checked on the Phantom, exactly what I feared had happened, which is all this vertical space in here had created all kinds of fun little air vortices that resulted in paint dusting and roughness kind of like, along the wing root here, on some of the sides, on the folded portion of the wings. And so, quick fun with some 4000 grit sanding cloth and trusty fiberglass pen knocked all that right back. Now, before I move on doing more with the light gold gray, what I want to do is really fix up the white so that I can come in and mask it and get the town on getting the gray all nice and beat up. Before I really dive into that, something I want to just kind of pick out is, like, if you look up here at the intakes, they are lighter and warmer than, say, the wings or the area right behind them. But if you look in certain areas, like right back here on the spine, it's basically very close tonally to what's going on up here. And a lot of that is because this went down over lighter things that went down over whites and tans and lighter grays and even pinks. And this all went down over dark gunship gray. Now, as I get the white sorted out, I'm also going to be lightening up the area where the light gold gray is, so then when we come back over it, it will more closely match what's going on the forward portion of the intakes. But first, it's time for some white. And instead of diving into Insignia White or Navy White, I'm going to use a little bit of good old basic white, just to really, really dial up the white that's there, so that I can come in and put the other dingier whites on top without really having to, commit a whole shitload of paint. And it's funny because the radome, based on the references I've been looking at least for, some of these VMFA 323 birds, was just really, really dingy, like almost radome tannish. It looks like we got a little piece of florum in there. Get that out. All right. Whoa. Easy, killer. Come in and touch up the flaperons. Now again, this is not the white I'm going to go with. This is way too stark, way too vibrant. But it's going to make it easier to paint but it's going to make it easier to paint the other grungier whites on top. Next up, we've got these sides here I want to sort out. Give them a little bit something of a boost. All right, now that I've got the white sorted out, I'm going and I'm adding in kind of some splotchy areas of white to the just overall surface. This will happen with a couple of different tones of white over time, and some other colors as well. Okay, next up, it's time to go ahead and pull the white back a little bit from the strong basic white base that we gave it. And for that, on this Phantom, I will be using some MRP Insignia White. Now, we've been through this color before. It's a lot dirtier and more of an off-white, kind of like a yellow white, than basic white or even than navy white. So, here we go. Now, this is just going to be another base color on the radome. The radome's going to get even darker than this and even dirtier than this. And I apologize, this will probably be really hard to see on camera because it's a very subtle difference as it's going down, even to my eyes here staring at it. It's one of those things that you really notice when you're basically just looking at it right side by side with the regular, cooler, cleaner white tone of the basic white. But I'm hoping that the darker dirtier tone will also make the gray look a little bit lighter as well. Because it won't have that super bright thing to contrast against. But we'll see. I mean, you can kind of make that out in camera, I think, about how much dingier this flaperon is than this one. So that's kind of the look that we're going for. Okay, let's take it over to the side. This gleaming white has got to go. And I think up here at the radome, it's tough to see on my monitor at my desk because it's kind of washed out, but I think you can see the tonal difference between the radome and the more basic white right here. Let's go ahead and finish off the underside of the radome. I'm going to have to set this down. So I know I posted about this on my Facebook page, but since about Christmas, I've been fighting some various aches and pains. It started as headaches, then like weird back pains. And it has transitioned into fun, pretty much constant tingling in my hands and feet. And so I got an MRI, and it turns out I've got 4 herniated discs. And one thing that tends to aggravate them is holding a decently heavy model in weird positions for extended periods of time. So trying to do a little bit less of that here. Oh, goodbye oil brusher. Alright, let's get this fucker sorted right here. So you can see this starting to take shape. Now I realize it's boring as fuck to watch me paint white over white, so you get the idea. Let's go ahead and do maybe a little tiny bit more, like maybe in this area, and then I'll cut the video and we'll just kind of pick back up once it's all done. Okay, so the Insignia White is down where it needs to be on the radome, on the flaperons, on the underside, all that good stuff, right? And it's looking like it needs to look, I think. Next up, it's time to get the radome even dirtier. I've got a really cool reference photo of one 323 Phantom where it literally looks like radome tan up here. Now, I don't necessarily want to just paint the whole fucking thing radome tan. That would be kind of ridiculous. But I've gone ahead and mixed some MRP radome tan into the Insignia White that I had left in the cup. And I'm just going to kind of lightly attack this. So, do. Get it different than everything else. It's just one of those things that struck me as really cool to just kind of build multiple different tones and colors into this thing, 'cause just a straight up high vis scheme can be very, I won't say boring, they're interesting schemes, but maybe kind of same as everything else. Like all this, all the high-vis schemes, apart from the markings, kind of look the exact damn same. And this was a bit of character that I thought was pretty cool. Okay, just to kick things up a little bit, I've added a few drops of Middlestone and a few drops of yellow to the mix, so we can get more of that kind of grungy tone that I'm after here. Plan is to add this in and then probably come back with like a sanding sponge, just scuff it up. Okay, I think that's a nice, good, dirty look we got going. It's going to be fun messing that up even more. And with that, I think I'm going to call it an evening because it's getting kind of late. Okay, friends, now that I've got the white as painted as it's going to get, it's time to go ahead and mask it off. And I'm going to start up here with the radome. Again, the radome is going to get some special treatment later on, but at this point in the game, I think it makes the most sense to mask it off. So I'm using some Tamiya tape. This is some of their thin shit. We'll see if it does the job or if I need to get out some actual curve tape for this. This stuff has generally done me pretty good though, so fingers crossed. Take off the tail so I don't bust it up. Let's pop out the exhaust that were back there showboating for some pictures. Let's see what we can make of this. One very good thing about the Phantom's nose is that the actual curve is fairly simple, so it's not that big of a deal to mask it. Alright, so that's the worst of that. Alright, next up, pop out these outer flaperons. They're safe now. Next up, I've got a special little surprise. Okay, so next up is this super cool Furball masking sheet, which has masks for basically the white portions of the airframe, as well as masking off when you're going to be spraying the metal portions. We're not quite there yet. Alright, I'm going to pause this and get this off camera. This is fucking stupid. Okay, so I've gone ahead and gotten all of the fun shit masked, including the flaperons, the fuselage sides, the tail, and of course the radome. So now it's time to get back to all the different shades of gray, starting with some good old neutral gray, Fs 36270. Now the point of all these is to build up all kinds of different shading underneath what will be the final light gold gray coat. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've added a little bit of shading in terms of lines and panels and things like that. Now I've thinned up the neutral gray and I've turned the MAC valve down. So I've got this nice kind of spitting thing going on with it. And so we're just going to grimy things up a bit. With a little bit of spatter. The fun thing about spatter is we can just add it everywhere. And all it will do is create a bunch of fun textures for us. Especially if we add multiple colors. But we're going to start again with our neutral gray. That's one grimier looking aircraft than I started with, isn't it? Again, this is super, super subtle, and most of it will vanish when it comes time to actually put the final gold gray down on this, but it'll also pop back up in terms of giving the finish some depth. Okay, next up is a tiny little bit of Gunship Gray Fs 36118. On the F4 that I'm targeting, it's kind of my loose inspiration. This panel right here in particular is darker than all the others. And I think it's a kind of cool little visual. And then this one back here so we're going to make sure we get them nice and dark. So when we come back through, they will still stand out. Okay, next up we've got Pru Pink, a very light pinkish color to help us restore some of the balance from the darker grays and some of the spattering work. So we're going to be very targeted with this. We don't want it everywhere, but we do want it in a few places just to add a little bit of something. And next, we're going back to US Navy White. Notice that doing this dark and then light sort of line shading can get some really interesting effects when you start putting paint over top of it. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking overall. I think the next stage is to go ahead and hit this with some thinner. So we can do one more big stippling action, and then we can go back to light ghost gray and finish this off. Now the idea with this lighter stippling is to not only kind of tone everything down, but also to provide that lighter base that will let the light gold gray really hit its true color, or the true color I want it to be. Okay, now I'm going to clean out the airbrush, and we're going to switch over to light gold gray and hopefully get to the end of color time, or at least main color time. Okay, so we've got the gold gray restored. Everything is looking nice and happy there. Now it is time to go ahead and paint the anti-glare strip in front of the canopy. For this, I'm going to be using my favorite MRP Night Camo Black. I've taped off a good chunk. I'm just going to try to not spray back this way too much to avoid some overspray. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Let me take a pause and unmask everything, and we'll see how we're looking. And here we are at the point where I'm ready to call main paint wrapped up. Now I still have to do the core guard on the leading edges. I still have to get back here and do all of the metal for the heat shielding. I have to do it on the rear stabilators as well. But for the most part, for the grays and the whites and the radome and the anti-glare panel, we're in a pretty good place. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up episode 8, and we'll pick back up handling things like the heat shielding and all the metallic bits. And then after that, we'll probably do an episode 9 focused on a few other fun things like the chipping, scratching, whatever, up on the radome. Maybe a few touch-ups, particularly on like the white portion here on the extended wings on the reference I've got. There's a whole lot of gray in there too from touch-ups, so might do that, might wait until after I put on the markings, but that is the plan. Metallics next. So thanks for watching, hope this was enjoyable, hopefully it ends up being a bit less lengthy than the previous installment, and as usual, if you want to catch these early and get some behind the scenes peeks at things going on, then there's always Patreon at patreon.com/DukesModels. Until next time, catch y'all later.